He was just a boy, standing on the corner, playing his violin with a smile, until racist cops smashed it to pieces. But what they didn't know, his mother wasn't just any parent. She was the FBI director. And in seconds, the entire story turned upside down. Jordan Williams was only 12 years old, but when he held his violin, he felt like the whole world belonged to him. Every Saturday afternoon, he stood on the corner of Maplewood Street, the sun warming his face as his bow danced across the strings. His music wasn't loud or flashy. It was pure, the kind that made strangers stop in their tracks, children smile, and even tired workers pause to breathe. To Jordan, each note was a piece of his grandmother's memory, the woman who had first placed a tiny violin in his hands and told him that music was a language of the soul. With his little sister clapping along from the steps nearby, Jordan played with a heart full of joy, never asking for money, only sharing what he loved most. The neighborhood adored him, often cheering and recording videos to post online. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered again, swaying with the rhythm, their faces softened by the sweet melody. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing could disturb the peace. But then, the familiar hum of a police car broke through the music. 2 officers pulled up, their faces stern, their eyes fixed on Jordan, not with admiration, but suspicion. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the officers stepped out, muttering to each other, shaking their heads as though they had already judged the boy with the violin. Jordan's hands tightened on the instrument, confusion replacing the calm on his face. He was just a kid playing music, but the way they approached made his stomach twist with unease. The joyful harmony of the street began to fade, replaced by a tension so heavy that even the notes trembling in the air seemed afraid to linger. The officers walked toward Jordan with heavy boots and harder stares, their voices cutting through the uneasy silence. "What are you doing here, kid? You can't be hanging around like this," one barked, ignoring the small crowd that tried to explain he was only playing music. Jordan swallowed nervously, clutching his violin as if it were a shield. "I'm just playing," he said softly, his voice trembling. But instead of listening, the taller officer snatched the violin case from the sidewalk, flipping it open as though searching for evidence of something criminal. When he found nothing but sheet music and a broken pencil, frustration flared in his eyes. "Enough games," he growled, and before anyone could stop him, he ripped the violin from Jordan's hands. Gasps erupted from the crowd as Jordan cried out, reaching desperately for his instrument, but the officer slammed it against the side of the patrol car with a sickening crack. The delicate wood splintered, strings snapping like tiny screams into the afternoon air. Jordan froze, his body shaking, his heart breaking in ways words couldn't capture. His little sister burst into tears, shouting, "That's his violin! Why would you do that?" But the officers only sneered, brushing her aside as though her voice didn't matter. The onlookers stood in shocked silence, phones recording every second, but no one dared to step forward. Jordan's knees wobbled as he bent down, picking up the shattered pieces of his violin with trembling hands. The music that once brought light to the street now lay in ruins at his feet, destroyed not because of a crime, but because of a cruel assumption. The moment burned into the hearts of everyone watching, especially Jordan, whose world had just been torn apart with one violent swing. Jordan sat on the curb, clutching the shattered pieces of his violin against his chest as tears streamed silently down his face. His sister wrapped her small arms around him, whispering, "It's okay, we'll fix it," though even she knew it was beyond repair. The officers, unmoved, laughed quietly among themselves, one muttering, "Guess he'll think twice before loitering here again." Their words cut deeper than the broken wood, and for a moment, Jordan felt completely invisible, like his pain didn't matter. But what the officers didn't realize was that the crowd gathering around them was no longer silent. Whispers grew louder as people pointed their phones toward the cops, murmuring about injustice, cruelty, and racism. A middle-aged man in a suit stepped forward carefully and said, "That boy wasn't hurting anyone. You had no right." The officers shot him a glare and snapped back, "Step away if you don't want trouble." The tension in the air thickened, and though fear kept most people rooted in place, outrage was building like a storm. In the middle of this chaos, Jordan's phone, still buzzing in his pocket, began to ring. He hesitated, then answered with shaking fingers. On the other end was his mother, her voice calm yet sharp. "Jordan, what's happening? Someone just sent me a video." His heart lurched as he whispered, "Mom, they broke it. They broke my violin." A silence followed, heavy and dangerous, before her voice returned, colder than steel. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming." Jordan wiped his tears, a flicker of hope sparking through his despair, though he knew the officers had no idea who they were about to face. The crowd didn't know either, but the ground beneath that street was about to shift, because his mother wasn't just any parent. She was the director of the FBI. The low hum of black SUVs announced her before anyone saw her. Within minutes, the street that had once echoed only with Jordan's violin was swarmed with sleek government vehicles pulling up one after another. Doors swung open in unison, and men and women in sharp suits stepped out, their badges flashing under the fading sunlight. The officers who had been laughing moments earlier froze, their smirks vanishing as a tall woman in a dark suit and heels emerged from the center vehicle. Her presence was commanding, her eyes sharp, and her steps steady with the kind of authority that made the crowd instantly fall silent. Jordan's heart leapt. His mother was here. "Which one of you touched my son?" Her voice rang out, calm but powerful, carrying across the hushed street. The officers shifted uneasily, one stuttering, "Ma'am, we were just," but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I don't want excuses. I want names." She walked past the stunned crowd and knelt beside Jordan, gently brushing his tears away and lifting the broken violin from his arms. For a moment, her expression softened, but when she stood and turned back to the officers, her face hardened like stone. "You assaulted a child. My child. And you destroyed something priceless to him." The silence was suffocating until she pulled a badge from her jacket and held it up. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she declared, "I am Director Naomi Carter of the FBI, and you will answer for this, today." The officers paled, suddenly aware of who they had crossed. Phones rose higher, recording every second as whispers of shock and awe spread like wildfire. Jordan clung to his sister, a spark of pride replacing his tears, knowing the tide had turned the moment his mother arrived. The street was dead silent, every eye locked on Director Naomi Carter as she faced the trembling officers. Her calm voice carried more weight than a shout ever could. "You profiled a child because of the color of his skin. You mocked his passion. And you thought no one would hold you accountable. Well, you were wrong." She signaled with a flick of her hand, and two agents in dark suits stepped forward, swiftly relieving the stunned officers of their weapons and radios. The cops sputtered protests, but Naomi didn't flinch. "You're under federal investigation for misconduct, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights." The crowd gasped as the very men who had mocked Jordan were placed in handcuffs themselves, their arrogance replaced by fear. Naomi bent down once more, picking up the shattered violin pieces and pressing them into her son's hands. "They can break wood, Jordan," she whispered, her voice soft enough for only him to hear, "but they can't break your spirit. And they will never take your music." Jordan's tears returned, but this time they were tears of relief, his small hands clutching both the broken violin and his mother's strength. The crowd, once uncertain, now erupted in cheers, some chanting his name, others applauding Naomi's unshakable stand. Neighbors who had once walked past Jordan without a second glance now looked at him with admiration, realizing they had witnessed something far bigger than a boy's violin. They had seen justice in its purest form. Naomi guided her children toward the SUV, her arm wrapped protectively around Jordan's shoulders, and before stepping inside, she turned back to the crowd. "Remember what you saw today," she said firmly. "Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand." With that, the door shut, and as the convoy pulled away, Jordan leaned against his mother, feeling safe, proud, and unbroken. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Blax Stories for M.